These players were supposed to be next up, and some were even considered top 5 in their respective positions, and they sucked. And your fantasy team fell on its face. Today we're going over 6 fantasy players who failed to live up to their potential in 2022, and then I'll tell you my outlook on them going into 2023. Let's start out with Elijah Moore. Moore could have been a sneaky pick coming into the year, but he had less usage and a decrease in yards per catch and touchdowns as well. He was even a trade target for some NFL teams at the beginning of his sophomore year because Zach Wilson just would not throw this guy the ball. There was actually a midseason period where Elijah Moore had 7 catches in 6 games. I'm not blaming this on him. I'll blame it on the QB situation, and I've explained this before. You're not going to do very well when you have Zach Wilson, Mike White, and Joe Flacco throwing you the ball. Not to mention, Garrett Wilson kind of sucked up all of the targets on this team. Fun fact, though, those 3 quarterbacks were not pushing the ball in Elijah Moore's direction, and he actually had more yards of separation per route than Garrett Wilson. The situation could be better this year if the Aaron Rodgers rumors materialize, but this year was definitely a letdown for those who thought they were going to get value with Elijah Moore. Next up, Chase Claypool. Holy lack of usage. Now, I don't think our expectations should have been too high for Claypool at the beginning since he was going to the most run-heavy team in the NFL in the Chicago Bears, but 27 targets in 7 games is ridiculous. Not to mention, he only hauled in 14 of those, and he had just 140 total yards in that span with the Bears. If you projected Claypool's production on the Bears through an entire NFL season, you get 34 catches, 340 yards, and 0 touchdowns. The trifecta of Fields, Herbert, and Montgomery on the run game was productive, but offensive linemen like Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum getting hurt and missing a chunk of games forced Fields to tuck it and run probably more than the Bears organization desired at times. Nonetheless, the production and usage of Chase Claypool in those final 7 games was not what the Bears paid for in that trade with their 2nd round pick. So I would imagine that he gets more involved next year. Next up, we've got an old friend who was performing pretty well a couple of years ago. We're talking about Robert Woods. It wasn't long ago that Robert Woods was a 1,000-yard receiver. In 2020, he missed the mark by 64 yards. Last year, he got hurt during the Rams Super Bowl run, and this year, he just wasn't getting targeted down the field. Despite playing in all 17 games this year, Woods actually had less yards than he did in 9 games the season prior for Los Angeles. His 9.9 yards per reception is the lowest of his career as well. And with Treylon Burks getting 13.5 yards per receptions, you can do the math and figure out where those throws down the field are going. Now, the Titans run the ball at the 4th highest rate in the league. There's a heavy utilization of Derrick Henry, of course. And the fact that Burks nearly matched Woods' yard total while missing a third of the season tells me Woods will be their wide receiver too in a run-heavy scheme at best. There's not much upside for this guy going forward. Let's move on to the next guy. It's Russell Wilson. Let Russ cook. Well, he cooked. He cooked the Broncos' chances of making the playoffs pretty well. If it wasn't for this guy having over 20 points in 3 of his last 4 weeks, he's probably number 1 on this list. The Broncos gave this man a top defense, supposedly what he was missing in Seattle the last few years, and many expected superb play out of Russ in his first year in the Mile High City. 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. He was averaging just 13.4 fantasy points per game in his first 11 weeks before nudging his average up a couple of points with some good games against Kansas City. Russ had the worst numbers of his career in terms of completion percentage, touchdown passes, sacks. I can't make too many excuses other than Hackett's play calling because Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton were healthy. They missed 4 games combined. With new play calling next year, we're going to hope for the best, but I would take almost half of the league's quarterbacks over Russell Wilson right now. Next up, we've got Kyle Pitts. Now, folks, I'm keeping injuries out of this analysis for the most part, so that's not why Kyle Pitts is on here. In the 10 games that Pitts did play, him and Mariota were just not on the same page, chapter, book, series, or library. Pitts caught just 28 of his 59 targets, just a 47% catch rate, which is atrocious, and he was averaging a whopping 36 yards per game. I understand he operates on the 2nd most run-heavy team in the game. I'm tired of hearing that he is a top 5 fantasy tight end just waiting to happen. I need to see it now. Travis Kelce, George Kittle, TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews, and Evan Ingram are all far ahead of this guy right now and in better situations to produce. Before we get to our most disappointing player from 2022, I highly suggest that you check out our video on the guys who broke out this year and are must-haves rolling into 2023. Our number 1 guy, it's Jonathan Taylor. This guy had the most damaging drop in value of anybody else on this list. Now, Jonathan Taylor may have been inside the top 35 in running backs. He may have outperformed the majority of the people on this list relative to their position. And he may have scored more than 13 fantasy points per game when healthy. But the impact was horrible in terms of how much he underperformed and how many people he severely hurt by playing average. And I don't have to remind anybody of this. Jonathan Taylor was the number 1 pick in so many fantasy leagues heading into this year. He had performances of 7, 3, and 6 points in standard PPR during the year, and he wasn't nearly as efficient as when we saw him in 2021. There were people trying to convince others that Jonathan Taylor was the best running back in the game, even ahead of Derrick Henry. The Colts O-line didn't look nearly as impressive as it has been in years past, and that can also be exposed from the pass blocking side of things, with Matt Ryan being sacked 38 times in 12 games. So I honestly think that Jonathan Taylor will be undervalued coming into this year's draft. If he's available in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round, you go right ahead and grab him. You're not risking nearly as much as those who took him first overall this past year. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe, and browse the page for more fantasy football research. Thank you so much for watching as always, and we will see you in the next one.